Welcome to A Cult of Personality, esoteric podcast extraordinaire. I'm your host, Greg Kaminsky, and Billy Hepper is your co-host. Now, in episode number 216, author, speaker, and our good friend, Angel Millar, returns to the show to discuss his most recent book, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos. Personally, I find Millar's writing to be inspirational, motivational, beneficial, and eminently practical. His most recent book, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, meets us where we are as modern men and helps us to understand the work required to realize our potential. If you want to understand the truth of your situation and how to make it better, I highly recommend Angel's book. If you read it and implement its recommendations, your life will begin to change for the better. Angel Millar is a well-known lecturer on initiation, symbolism, Freemasonry, and self-development, as well as an artist and student of the martial arts. The author of several books, including The 3 Stages of Initiatic Spirituality and The Path of the Warrior Mystic. You can find him online at angelmillar.com. A Cult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to chamberofreflection.com, our membership website, who aids us in the cause of informed, authentic, and accessible interviews about Western esotericism. Thank you again. Because of your support, we're able to bring you recordings of this caliber and many more to come. Anathema Publishing Limited. Quality occult books and contemporary esoterica. Established in 2011, Anathema Publishing aims to provide superior literature in content and form by creating a trinosophic relationship in troth and gabo between publisher, author, and reader. Anathema Publishing produces refined books for the true bibliophile on topics ranging from Gnosticism, traditional craft, alchemy, Hermeticism, witchcraft, to Luciferian theosophy. www.anathemapublishing.com. The intro music is Awakening by Paul Avgerinos, and the outro music is Forbidden Zone by Equinox. Angel Millar, it's really a pleasure to welcome you back to A Cult of Personality podcast once again to discuss your most recent book, The Path of the Warrior Mystic. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, thank you. It's always great to be speaking with you.
Thanks for coming on to the show today, Angel. It's great to finally be able to sit down with you. So thanks for taking the time for us.
Likewise, thank you.
Before we begin, I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed your book. I felt like it addressed so many aspects of development and growth in terms of what we face now, but it also, harkens back so much to the ancient world, and
right.
It's just wonderful to read, and I feel like your development as a writer is absolutely tremendous. And each time we talk about one of your books, I feel like, wow, this book is really, really amazing, and then the next one is like even better, and so it's just wonderful, wonderful to really be able to watch your growth as an author and reap the benefits of that. So
great.
I just wanted to express that before we begin.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome. So Billy, why don't you kick things off for us?
Yeah. I mean, I just have to say this interview is going to be, I think, extra special for me. I spent so long reading and listening to both you guys, Angel and Greg, especially back when I was, first sort of seriously exploring Freemasonry and dipping my toes in the water in the whole Western esoteric tradition. So it's very meaningful personally to be able to speak with you today. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Angel, as you know, I've been a big fan of your books for a long time now. And I've been sort of watching your career develop from the sidelines over the years, and it's interesting to see how it's sort of evolved. I mean, you started out writing a lot about Freemasonry, which is, of course, a passion that all three of us share. And from there, it's sort of evolved into more, I guess you could say, esoteric topics, dealing with things like magic, initiation, of course, exploration of these three archetypes, the craftsman, the warrior, and magician. And finally, in your new book, The Path of the Warrior Mystic, really sort of doubling down on this new focus, which seems to be more about self-development, or I guess you could say the realization of the higher self, particularly for men.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely.
My question is, did you always have an interest in sort of mentoring and offering advice to men, or is this a role that you sort of took on out of necessity? Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this new book.
Yeah, so really, it was spurred on by my experiences of going around America in particular and meeting lots of different young men, and really the common theme across the United States being the young men or even older men really felt that they had no real initiation into manhood and no guidance into manhood or even adulthood. More generally, and certainly this was an experience that I shared with them. I didn't really receive any proper guidance about becoming a man, and I think it's also the case in Great Britain and many other Western countries as well. And while that's been the case for many decades, I think what's different now is that there's a great deal of hostility towards men and manhood in general, which we see in the media really every day. And, I would not want to be a young man growing up today being told that everything about me was somehow to blame for everything that's gone wrong in the world. And at the same time, having no positive role models, no guidance as to how to actually act, especially from other men, of course, that have become successful in any kind of area. Yeah. And I think what society doesn't want to recognize is that the vast majority of men, probably 40 and under, maybe even 50 or 60 and under, are really, in a sense, adrift and don't understand what it is to be a man, and have had no guidance in that area at all, and are generally unhappy and, in a sense, are kind of very lost in the world and trying to grab onto any kind of meaning or any kind of guidance that they can, but none is really what they need.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I just have to say it was such a joy to read a self-development book for men that is actually focused on, some of the more traditional classical philosophies and virtues. And it doesn't get into the usual sort of tiresome men's self-help tropes that we find out there right now, which can actually be quite toxic. So I really feel like... Yeah, there's no chest beating in there. Yeah, it doesn't have that macho sort of thing going on.
No, not at all. And I think what I make pretty clear from the first chapter is that it's really about integrating these different aspects and becoming a whole person. And at the end of chapter 1, I'd say that if you consider yourself to be a really masculine guy, take up poetry and meditation, and if you consider yourself to be a feminine man, take up weightlifting and martial arts. And that way you can discover who you really are, because we in the West, in the modern West, are really are told that we should be in a niche, we should specialize, we should be one thing, and and I don't want to be critical of women, but women think of themselves as very open-minded, but at the same time, women will be open-minded towards let's say more feminine men. That is true. But what I have come across is that both men and women in society do not like the idea of men who are, let's say, who meditate, who are artistic, who can write well, who can talk confidently in public, and who work out and are physically strong and do martial arts and can handle themselves in a violent confrontation. And when you look at the warrior archetype, and if you look at the higher type of warrior across civilizations and throughout time, in fact, you find that the greatest warriors were also great poets or artists. They had a spiritual practice that they practiced every day. And so you find that the warrior really is, in a sense, a kind of also an artist and in a sense his own priest as well. And I'm against the cliches of gender as much as anyone else, but I think that what is offered today is very much is a modern or a postmodern idea of what we should be. And actually, if we look across time and across civilizations, which presumably know something about sustaining healthy cultures, you do find that the warrior is this complex of what we would call masculine and feminine elements. There's no need to call them that these people are just well integrated. So that, I think, is the aim for probably men and women, but no one is saying this to men. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I just feel like there's so little out there right now, which is sort of in the vein of what you're offering in this new book, which is really practical sort of life advice for guys. I think it's really commendable what you've done. And I love how you kind of balance these, mythological stories, the tales of the Green Knight and that sort of thing, and philosophy. Right. But at the same time, you keep it very grounded with very practical advice to follow, almost like these mini sort of essays that are very easy to digest and read. So I know that after reading it, I wanted to go out and enroll in some sort of a traditional martial arts dojo or something. So I think it's great how you've achieved this balance, I think.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Angel, as I think about, what you said in regards to the way that, modern men are sort of informed as to how they're supposed to be by the media, by our culture and society, and in its institutions, it does make me wonder, because in part of your book, you write about this idea of community and being part of a community that is beneficial and that one can ultimately serve in, and yet many of the communities in our modern world are really just reinforcing the sort of negative stereotype of men that we're trying to overcome. So how do you kind of navigate that situation?
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think one thing that in that case is that these groups are essentially intellectual groups, and everybody wants to be an intellectual because it sounds like, I have a greater insight into life and greater understanding of life than other people. But intellectuals have a tendency to get lost in their own ideas and are disengaged and unattached to actual reality, which is why, when intellectuals come up with concepts about how society should work and those societies are put into practice, the inevitable result is disaster and very often extreme poverty and death for a lot of people. And, if you join an intellectual group, quote unquote intellectual, they, of course, will absorb the latest ideas of society. That is true. And one of the sad things about Western society today is that people who call themselves thinkers or who think of themselves as thinkers have usually never thought anything original in their entire lives. And you can hear their opinions all around you all day, from the media to people talking on the subway, and the intellectual just thinks that because he has a college degree and says these same stupid things that he is somehow an intellectual. That's not true. And again, this is a reflection of extreme unbalance in Western society, and the downgrading of reality itself. And I don't think that it is one thing. I don't think it's all the media. I think it's a perfect storm of different things. Another reason why people are not interested in the body is because it is this idea propagated in spirituality that my body is just a used car that I drive around and I can discard it later on and it's worthless, which is completely false. But even more than that, it's the implicit idea of social media that my avatar is my true self and my physical self is somehow just a shadowy reflection, and is kind of unreal. And so really in the 21st century, as it progresses, it will be more and more important to get in touch with our body and in touch with physical reality. And so, to people who are wondering, well, what kind of group should I join? Well, not an intellectual group. You should join a group that is based in physical reality. So a martial art where if you do some kind of martial art move to defend yourself and you get beaten up, and then cold reality will shine its light upon you, and you will be forced to recognize that it didn't work, and you need to adjust to reality, not reality needs to adjust to you. And another factor, of course, is take up some kind of art or some kind of manual skill, whether that's fine art, painting, or playing a musical instrument, or custom building motorcycles or something. We need to get back in touch with our physical reality. And if you can do that in a group, so much the better. And I'm not poo-pooing all groups that are based on a shared worldview or intellectual pursuits. They can be good, but what you need in that case is people who are accomplished in different fields, and who have a grounding in physical reality and in the body, who aren't just all thinking or all regurgitating ideas that you can hear on the TV any day of the week.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And as much as I love the internet, what you're saying is 100% correct, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, if I could just interject, I mean, we seem to find ourselves in a generation or a couple generations that seem very reluctant about the idea of joining any sort of organization or group or affiliating with any cause. And this is, of course, something that Freemasonry is wrestling with right now with our membership numbers. And how do we, I'm just thinking out loud, how do we engage with men, I guess, to show them the real benefits of joining some sort of a group?
Yeah, well, that's difficult. It's especially difficult in a time when everything is not accessible online, but there's a simulacra of everything you could want online, right? And I do remember many years, probably about a decade ago, when Greg was interviewing a spiritual guru. And I don't know if Greg remembers this, but he had his own Facebook group. And at one point he makes the remark that, as one of his students said, why would anyone join Freemasonry when you can join a Facebook group? Which is really a sign of total degradation and spiritual degradation. The you think joining a Facebook group of faceless individuals is somehow equivalent to being in a group of people in your area and meeting physically regularly. It's completely, I mean, it's would be regarded as madness in any other time, quite honestly. But people aren't used to having these communities, real communities where people are meeting and doing things together, and you have to accommodate people with different ideas and different beliefs and social backgrounds, and meeting people that you wouldn't normally meet, and having to get along with them. And people are more and more compartmentalized as well, of course, and more and more told to tiptoe around each other, so that we, in a sense, don't even really know the people we're around often. Certainly, in a work environment, you're going to say less and less about yourself and keep it as superficial as possible. But so I don't think there's any easy fix. So I would say with Freemasonry, that, and this would apply to other groups as well, that quantity is a good thing to a certain degree, but quality is better. And right now, Freemasonry still has several 100,000 members in the US and more across the world. And even if it were to get to 10,000, which would be infinitely larger than virtually every occult group out there, or in fact larger than every occult group out there, although it would be small in comparison, if you had a high quality members, then I think that would almost be preferable. And there will be a downside to it, but quality is more important, and quality of experience is more important than quantity. So that's not necessarily a tragedy, but I do foresee that more people will join groups like that, because it's the only way to kind of step out of the simulacra of reality that is presented as the absolute truth today, and to experience, in a sense, almost anything real. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely agree. Angel, there's actually a great quote I just wanted to touch on that was in, I believe, chapter 1 of your book. It really jumped out at me. Just want to read it quickly, if I may. Mm-hmm. It says, take control of your life, make things, develop your body, respect the great martial artists and the great poets. When men have nothing that they are passionate about, nothing concrete that they love and find engaging, nothing that they can mold with their own hands and through their own sweat, they become fanatics about ideas, ideologies, and theories, which, although filling them with a sense of purpose, slowly drains the life out of them. And I just thought, wow, that was a great observation. It really became self-evident to me just during the whole COVID pandemic and lockdown. I really began to notice sort of the types of people who unfortunately begin to fall kind of into the more, I guess you could say, fanatical sides of both, the anti-vax and the pro-vax movement, and sort of the bitter culture wars that started to erupt out of all that. People who had some sort of a sense of balance already before that all hit in their life, some sort of a spiritual tradition or, physical activity, a strong sense of self, seemed to fare the best, I think, during that whole mess. And then
that's right.
Yeah, on the flip side, what I noticed is that the more sort of aimless, social media addicted, consumerist types easily seem to become more radicalized, you could say, more angry. They sort of gather together in these camps on either side because really they had nothing else in their life that's going on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And politics and identity politics for many people is a drug. There's no two ways about it. It prevents them from really living their lives the way hard drugs would, and really sucks them in and drains their energy in a very similar way. And human beings were not created to be worried about ideas to this extent, or fanatical about ideas that they generally would never put into practice anyway, but or that constantly change throughout the years. What politics said we must believe today is the exact opposite of what it said we should believe a few years ago, and it constantly changes. In a sense, to keep us fixated on it, that there always has to be a new disaster. We always have to change our mind because our minds 6 months ago were, oppressive or whatever. And what we believe today, we won't even remember that we believed in 15 years from now. In fact, most people wouldn't even believe that they believed it. They will have changed so much. And it will continue like this, and left and right change positions all the time. For example, it's the right that's now championing women's rights. Well, 2 years ago, it was the left. So, it's not even a matter of political sides. But the only way out of this truly strange behavior, and really a behavior that is a result of probably of long-term stress, but possibly also of mental illness as well for some people, is to get back to reality and to get back to the physical world. And that doesn't mean returning to a 2.5 children and 2 parents type lifestyle with a 1950s morality that was already degenerate in another way, or at least the 1950s mentality was already warped and broken.
Mhm.
But it does mean that I would say disengaging from social media quite a bit and focusing more on what you can do to positively improve your life. That's really going to be much more important, not only for you but for everyone down the road. Because you won't be spreading all this hate around. So that will be better.
Yeah, thank you. And I think your book really can help people establish that kind of sense of routine and spiritual discipline that is going to ultimately benefit them. So,
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah,
I agree. And speaking of which, this idea of discipline and a lot of the behaviors and activities that you're talking about here, I think would rightly fall under sort of the rubric of virtuous activities. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about virtue, why it's important, and maybe even help us better understand what virtue even is, as this more classical idea of like finding the mean between extremes.
Right. Yeah, well, so the word virtue actually comes from the word virtus, which really meant masculine virtues. And then today, of course, or later on, it became associated with the feminine. So a virtuous lady was a virgin and wore long dresses down to the ankles and so on. So it completely changed its meaning. But yeah, going to the mean between things. I mean, this is especially related to Aristotle's philosophy, of course, so that you want to find the golden mean between extremes. So, what is bravery? Well, bravery is the mean between cowardice and rashness. Rashness, you rush into a situation to take charge but are ill-equipped to really deal with it. So you're going to be defeated or hurt, or you're just not going to have a successful outcome. So that's rashness, where you just rush in. And then cowardice, of course, is where you shy away from engaging, even at a great cost to yourself, and certainly at cost to other people. And then bravery is the mean between the two. It's not rushing in without thinking and being ill-prepared, and it's not being too self-restrained to act. It's somewhere between the two. You act with with all of your sort of strengths that you can muster, really, in all of your experience, whether you succeed or fail, but there is at least some chance of success, or maybe there's not, but you can at least make some difference. So a brave soldier might know that he's going to die facing 100 enemies, but he also knows it might, they say, give other people time to escape. So that would be bravery, right? Not rashness or cowardice. But, I think it's interesting the way language changes. And, today, of course, we are concerned especially with safety and vulnerability, or being vulnerable. And being vulnerable is the latest sort of buzz phrase, I noticed. And, of course, this has come out of this culture of needing safety. And, first of all, these debates about safety and vulnerability were really cleared up a couple of thousand years ago by Aristotle. So we don't really need to engage in them. But of course, how many people in society, including media pundits or maybe even some intellectuals, how many of them have actually read Aristotle? Very few, right? So they don't even know the foundation of Western civilization. Even though they're always criticizing it. So, this argument about safety and vulnerability was cleared up, 2 millennia ago. But, certainly the fixation on safety is unhealthy and makes people less able to act in the world. And vulnerability, or being vulnerable, has been redefined, I notice, and is kind of taken in a new way. Somebody asked about vulnerability when I was speaking at a conference recently. So I made a point of looking up the word vulnerable after, and the first article that came up in the search results after dictionary definitions, the first article that came up was talking about how to be vulnerable, and the first example it gave of being vulnerable and why we should be vulnerable was, it said, if you're the owner of a company and you find out that one of your employees is looking after a sick child, meaning I think terminally sick or very sick child, that you should be vulnerable by reaching out and calling and expressing your regrets for this. And I think in this sense, what the term vulnerable actually means is you should narcissistically think that by doing the right thing, that you need to be praised and that you need to feel special. If you know someone who's looking after a sick child and they're your employee, just pick up the phone. You don't need to debate about, oh, I feel vulnerable and look how special I am. Yeah. And, it is this part of this narcissistic culture where it's all focused on me, or at least on my, not even feelings, I think on my perception, on my self-perception. And again, this is very much probably what is inevitable in a culture that is detached from the body and detached from physical reality and detached from any sort of community, meaning community in the traditional sense where we people meet physically together or are in the same proximity on a regular basis and have to deal with each other in the physical world. When you live in a time where everything can be intellectualized and those ideas are never tested anyway, and when they're a disaster, who cares? We've moved on to another set of ideas anyway, and we're detached from the body. Then you can play narcissistic games with your emotions. Oh, well, I was vulnerable because I did the right thing. Well, just do the right thing. Yeah. I mean, what about all these men over the millennia that were called up to go and fight in war? They didn't sit around thinking they were vulnerable. They just went to fight. And many of them were killed, and many of them came back completely broken, with their minds shattered and their bodies broken. But they weren't narcissistically sitting around, oh, I'm vulnerable because I picked up the phone or something. It's completely alien. And, maybe people think, well, shouldn't these people just be allowed to think that? And yeah, sure, of course they should. But I'm not saying it to really criticize people. I'm saying it because these people, in the sense, are the victims of their own thoughts. They're not happy. They're certainly not fulfilled. They're too wrapped up in their own minds to be fulfilled. Fulfilled is when you give yourself away. You put all your energy into doing something, and you're exhausted at the end of it. And if you go to a martial arts school and you get sort of a bit beaten up and you have some bruises, and it was an intense experience because you thought you might get really hurt and you did your best, you come away feeling amazing. But if you're constantly sitting around debating, well, was I vulnerable enough? What about my safety? You're going to end up a really miserable person and really suffering. And no wonder there is so many people who feel that they're suffering from mental illnesses or emotional illnesses or whatever it may be, because they're too caught up in their own minds.
Yeah, if I could just follow up, really, the way you're describing this self-centeredness and versus, care for others, or just sort of like going outwards, it's like very much one or the other. Like you can't be really both. Yeah. You can't be self-concerned and be caring about others at the same moment. And you're right, the self-concern overwhelms and people fall into like a black hole of it and seem to can't climb out. And I feel like it's not just virtue that's called for here. What you're describing is actually, like, in many ways, sort of heroic effort. And I think I'm just wondering if you would agree with that on some level.
Yeah, heroic effort. And I think, to be honest, I was thinking about this week, so maybe I'm not going to formulate it in the most perfect way ever. But I think what's needed is that we become conscious and, not to be political or to relate to politics, but, there is, of course, the idea of progress or of reacting against progress. And I think that you can go with the times. Everybody says, well, you have to change with the times, but except for people who are a bit more thoughtful. And if you listen to influential marketing gurus, for example, that they would never give you the advice to go with the times. They always give you advice to go against the times, and to do something different, which is generally a good idea. But if you want to stand out, but I think you can go with the times, you can go against the times, and you can stay where you are. And I think all three positions, in a sense, you can do consciously or unconsciously. And I would say probably 90% of the Western world is caught up in an unconscious motion, that they go with the times or they go against the times, or they stay where they are because they're essentially unconscious, and they're just doing what they heard in the media yesterday or this morning, or what their friends said. And they, very often think of themselves as intellectuals, but they've never had an original thought in their life, and they've certainly never thought through all of the things they have an opinion about. And I think, in a sense, the warrior is someone who is conscious and is doing something consciously. So you can get swept along towards whatever the latest trend is unconsciously, or you can consciously change thinking about all of the possibilities, and you kind of align yourself to this trajectory for the time being. Or you can, stagnate, or which would be unconscious, or you can consciously stand your ground, or you can go against the times in a sort of unconscious, reactive way, or you can see where the clear problems are with the trajectory of the majority, and realize that maybe it's good to go against the unconscious flow, and go against it consciously. So going with, standing your ground, or going against, you can do this consciously or unconsciously, but the warrior does it consciously. He's making actual conscious decisions, which is not to say that in the warrior arts or the fine arts or music or writing or any kind of skill that requires mastery at a certain point, that you aren't transcending conscious thought, because you definitely will and must to become a master. But I would say the warrior is someone who is conscious of his direction in life, whereas 90+% are unconscious and simply swept one direction or the other.
Angel, we've touched on this a bit earlier, but maybe we could kind of return to it. A reoccurring theme that I found running all through your new book is this question of what it means truly to be a man. Because, obviously we have a very skewed, confused view of what that means nowadays. So I think on both sides of the political spectrum, really. And I was reminded actually of a conversation I had a long time ago with a Catholic priest once, and he said something that always kind of stuck with me. It was something to the effect of, in the ancient and medieval world, a true measure of a man, what it really means to be a man, was so much more than just his brute strength or his, skill in battle. Those things were obviously still very important, but a true measure of a man was more relative to his relationship and his standing within his family, and then in a wider sense within his sort of community or his tribe. So, if you truly wanted to be a man, be a mentor to another man, help someone out who is maybe struggling, and build him up. It's not always about being sort of macho or being this sort of alpha male. That's not necessarily what you're going to be remembered for. And I thought about that a lot as I was reading over your book. Would you agree with this statement? And I guess building off of that, how can we begin to sort of reclaim the definition of classical manliness today?
Yeah, well, I think his definition is vague. In that, yes, the mark of a true man was his standing in the community, but the community at the same time were defining what it is to be a man, right? And generally speaking, that meant, that you were good at violence in some degree, and that you were cultured as well. And again, coming back to this this strange unity of what today we would describe as the masculine and the feminine in the warrior. So the greatest warriors, as I say, were, great poets or whatever have you as well, great thinkers, and had a spiritual practice and cultivated themselves. C.S. Lewis talks about the warrior having this double demand that he's supposed to be fierce in battle, but meek in civilized society. Probably, I think C.S. Lewis would say, especially towards women, you want to be polite and you don't want to impose yourself on women or use that violence against women. I think we would all agree with that. But, I think that's still a shallow definition. The true warrior isn't just fierce in battle. I mean, he's a master of the martial arts, yes, but it's not that he's just supposed to be meek in civilized society. He's supposed to be cultured, and that's how he becomes, a person of culture, right? By cultivating poetry or fine art, by practicing a religion, and by thinking deeply. And, it is true that a mark of a man was his reputation in society. But those with the best reputation tended to be men who were very much equipped at violence. And then as society became civilization, the men that we respected were also men of culture and learning as well. But the martial arts were a part of that. And even going back to the ancient Greek philosophy, Plato insisted that education had to be through wrestling, music, and through philosophy. So it was these three things together. Or if you look at Sufism, Sufism in the 12th century integrated not only Islamic mysticism, but also the structure of the trade guilds, and it adopted the chivalric code of Islam as well, fatwa. So it integrated the mystic, the warrior, and the craftsperson as well. Reputation, yes, that is true, but I think it is it is integrating these different aspects in a form of self-mastery, right? Mm-hmm. Which gives you confidence. And confidence, the thing about martial arts and violence as well is that, of course, you learn how to be violent, that is true, but you are also practicing not using it as well, or using it as minimally as possible. And, just to give you a small anecdote about, men, maybe not so much today, of course, because there are different, possibilities for men. You can be incredibly feminine today. And, and I have a mixed background in that regard as well, that we can go into briefly. But, when I first started martial arts a few decades ago, I remember there were about 4 guys who turned up one day, posing, flexing, presenting themselves as really tough guys. Within 3 minutes of the class, they were all sweating, heaving, and couldn't do what everybody else could do. And that includes, 4'5" women, of 20 years old. And they struggled every time. They were clearly much weaker and flabbier than everyone else. But every time they would present themselves as tough guys, they would only ever come together. They couldn't just come one of them at a time. And, and I emphasize joining a group, and that is important. But, I think, one clarification I would say today is you want to join that group alone. You don't want to go with your friends, and you don't want to go every single time with your friends. You need to walk into those places alone. And, that's true of martial arts. You need the guts to just walk in, see what it's like, try it out. Most people are going to be very nice to you. But it's also the case in other areas of life. When you listen to business consultants, they almost always say they don't like partnerships, because generally the partnership is based on the person with the ideas being too nervous to do it by themselves. And you have to go it alone, even into a group.
Yeah, it's a really good example, yeah. It's interesting, I was just thinking as you were talking, Greg and I have been reading a lot of Valentin Tomberg lately, a philosopher, and he talks a lot about the spiritual role of man as well, which is kind of explicitly linked back to this idea of restoring justice, bringing order out of chaos. This was something that most societies, and certainly the ancient Near East, had a real handle on. This idea of man bringing creation back in line with the right order of the divine. That was sort of the original job description of man that you can think about. In the Genesis account of the Bible, Adam is naming the animals. He's tending to the earth as sort of a guardian and protector. So I think keeping this sort of higher role in mind is very important, because we tend to get so distracted by the sort of trendy politics of the modern age, but it really does come down to this original mission of stewardship. I think stewardship of our own lives, setting things in order, restoring balance. That's sort of the higher function, I think, our true role as men.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the word justice, and in the Masonic ritual, I don't know if this is in every jurisdiction, but in some jurisdictions at least, it says that justice should be your guide. And today we have all kinds of concepts about justice that classical civilizations wouldn't recognize at all and would think were completely crazy. But justice is based on the idea of proportion, right? So the punishment should fit the crime, but if you work for someone and your coworker gets all of the rewards and you do all of the work, that's also unjust, right? So the rewards should also fit the effort as well. So justice is based on proportion. And proportion, of course, leads us back to the idea of harmony. Civilization itself is based on proportion. So law is based on proportion. Diet is based on proportion. It's proportional to your body size and the amount of energy that you're using up. So if you're working in a field all day, you're going to eat more food than if you're laying in bed all day, right? Or if you're 6 foot, you're going to eat more food than someone who's 3 foot, or a child, for example. So it's based on proportion. And then you get into higher realms as well, such as I'm sure mathematicians would talk about the beauty of numbers, but certainly in art, for example, in the fine art, you have proportion in the fine arts, right? So if you paint someone's portrait, all of those features need to be in proportion to the features of the person you're painting. Well, architecture, everything is in proportion to the human body. So the ceiling is a couple of feet above the head. The door is, a little wider than the sides of the body, and so on. So it's proportionate to the human body and the space we need to live as human beings. And today, of course, no one talks about proportion because, our society is, in a certain sense, is extremist. And it's extremist in one direction, and then after a few decades, it floods back, and it's extremist in the other direction. And proportion. And I mentioned that my belief that the warrior is someone who is conscious. Well, one of the things that the warrior has to be conscious about is proportion, right? And in regards to the warrior, of course, that means such things of how much you train, what you eat. But it also means, how you treat your enemies as well. And if you look back to societies where chivalry was important and was embodied by the warriors themselves, you find that they actually have respect for the enemy. And we don't even have respect for people with different ideas to us today. And we actively disrespect them. But, there's a really interesting anecdote about Richard the Lionheart, who was fighting Saladin. And it's unproven, but it's, an anecdote that's come through history. And probably is true, and if not, certainly captures the spirit of chivalry. And it said that he asked Saladin's brothers to send over some Islamic musicians so that he could listen to Arabic music in the evening one day. And he's also said to have loved what he heard. And today, politically, left or right, we always try and degrade the other side. And chivalry, with this cultivation, in the idea of chivalry, you cultivate the warrior arts, but also poetry, or a sense of beauty, a sense of the spiritual, a sense of the sacred. It does mean that you can even fight someone but still respect them and really appreciate their culture and express your appreciation for their culture. And that, if anything, that is the higher man. And The lower man is this person who degrades everything, even the best of values. People today will try and degrade people who are beautiful or who work out and say, oh, these people are monsters. Like, can't you just appreciate that this person works out and is healthy and fit? Or they don't like this person's opinion, and that person's an artist. Oh, we don't like his art, it's horrible. Can't you just appreciate it for what it is? You can disagree with his politics or her politics. You don't have to degrade people. And the problem for people that do that is not only do they cut themselves off from a source of to say spiritual nourishment and personal growth, because if you attack things that are good, you can't embody them. And that's what happens on both sides. So they end up attacking everything that's good, and then they end up, these sort of couch potatoes who, just these keyboard warriors, because what can they do? They've attacked everything except the idea of attacking other people. And so it's essential to have this respect and even love for other people that you maybe not dislike, but that you disagree with, or an opponent to. And I'm not saying we should go around opposing other people, but have respect for the best of other people, even if you disagree with them fervently. That's what makes us human.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Throughout the book, I found like certain little sections where you're just so articulate, and this is sort of related to what you were saying, not directly, but if I could just read this section.
Sure.
You said it might be different for each person, but often those who do not train the body find their aggression manifesting through their intellect. Those who neglect the gut, refusing to take risks, are hypersensitive to every little trial or tribulation and believe that they are in a constant battle. Those who do not cultivate the heart fall in love with themselves.
Yeah.
And that's
I'm glad I said
really
that.
powerful. That's just really powerful statement. And I think it's powerful because it's true.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And, I have noticed that, and life is hard, it is, I'm a good acquaintance of Mitch Horowitz. And if you read his books, well, I think one thing that becomes clear is, he's a proponent of positive thinking. And, he's not a proponent of positive thinking because he thinks life is easy and it's all wishful thinking. He knows from a tough childhood, life is really hard. And you can either equip yourself to deal with the harsh reality of the world, or you can be crushed by it. And my concern for younger people in particular is that they are insulated from the world, and they are told that they shouldn't take risks, and it will crush them, and they won't know why. But, from what I have seen, people that don't take risks, they end up full of hate, full of anger. They blame other people, but they hate themselves as well secretly. And I was lucky. And I was lucky to be very unlucky when I was young. I did all kinds of horrible manual jobs. I left school at 16. My future was absolutely hopeless. I mean, there was no way I could even envision living to the age of 40, to be honest with you. I thought I'd be dead long before that. And, when I may have mentioned this before, but when I was 20, after a very, very intense year, one of the most intense years of my life, I woke up and my lungs were bleeding, spatters of blood all over the sink. It was very dramatic. But, at 20, when your lungs are bleeding, and I was a non-smoker, I should point out, on top of having an extremely unstable life without really any prospects of earning a decent living at any time in the future, that's a real wake-up call. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because that and other horrible, stressful things throughout my life made me change my life. I had no safety net. If I failed, I was going to die, and that was the end of it. And I knew other people that have done pretty financially okay, not weren't wealthy, but were comfortable by the age of 20, 21. And and had a good job or whatever, and that wasn't the case for me. And that seems like good luck, but what it means is you'll be less likely and less able to take any risks later on. And with this culture of safety, we have to protect people from ideas, we have to protect people from words. Hey, I don't care, you do you, but you will never be any competition for me, because I can take risks and you will never be able to take any meaningful risks. It's going to be too hard for you. And these people think of themselves as victims, and in one sense they are absolutely correct, but they're not victims of what they think they're victims of. They are the victims of a society that says, we will protect you. The most important thing is that you're safe, and your feelings are safe, because they will not be able to take any risks. And if without taking any risks, they will not get anywhere in life. And more importantly, perhaps, they will never become who they should be. They will never fulfill their true potential. It's impossible. To do that, you have to take risks. There's a story I talk about in the book about two Japanese monks who came to America in I think the first half of the 20th century. And one of the monks fell in love with America and wanted to stay. And he was with his master. And one day his master picked up the disciples' bags and took him to the Golden Gate Bridge Park in San Francisco, where they were living in that city, and then said, put his bag down and said, see if the city conquers you or if you conquer it, and walked off and never saw him again. But the monk that stayed ended up becoming one of the early proponents of Zen Buddhism in America, and sort of introduced Zen Buddhism to America. But that's the attitude. See if the city conquers you or if you conquer it. See if life conquers you or if you conquer life. Not, I need to be safe or I need people to protect me. The problem with people protecting you is you're reliant on their goodwill to not turn around and victimize you. And plenty of those people that you rely on for your safety, they will victimize you, either intellectually or physically at some point in the future. You will not be free to make your own decisions.
Yeah. If we're talking about reality, there can be no reliance on human beings at all.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
And that's a very bleak message for people, that no one is here to keep us safe. But history shows us the more we rely on other people for our safety, the more vulnerable to being exploited or even killed we become. So you do have to.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, most people can't even rely on themselves for themselves. So
right.
How can you rely on other people, really?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And I have to say, not only are you one of the best writers I know, but absolutely one of the most interesting people that I know. And I'm really grateful to
thank you,
to be able to call you a friend. And just the work you've done over the years is really tremendous. And I'm really happy that you're able to share it with everybody, and appreciate you doing so here today.
Yeah, thank you. And and people may feel that I'm criticizing them, and if you feel that, I am, but it's not because I'm a hateful individual who wants to criticize you. It's because I think you're worth criticizing and that you can live an amazing life. And what I don't want to do is what I see a lot of writers doing, that is going around to different groups and saying, oh, you're the greatest. And then they go to the opposite group and they say the same thing because they just want to sell books. I want to sell books, but I'd rather change people's lives for the better. And, people who feel, angry, stuck, hateful, I don't blame them. Look at the way our emotions are manipulated every day online. But, all I'm saying is check out of that, take manageable risks and improve yourself mentally, physically, spiritually. Find something you love and you will contribute to the world and to your own life in ways that are unimaginable to you now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I just need to ask, do you have any new projects in the works? Are you writing anything new? Or
Yeah, so I always have new projects in the works. So I'm working on a book on self-development and self-hypnosis. It's in a sense, it's a kind of course in self-development through self-hypnosis, but also through more practical daily exercises, which are entirely integrated into your life, so that you wouldn't need to do additional things. It's really rectifying your diet, sleep, meditation, this kind of thing, reading. So that's one project, and probably after that, I've already written it, but I'm also wrapping up a work of sort of visionary prose poetry, a kind of cross between Nietzsche's "Thus Spake Zarathustra" and Khalil Gibran's "The Prophet," with a lot of essays on religion and initiation and spirituality. So those are the next two. And other than that, I'll just be trying to work more on myself.
Excellent.
Oh,
I really look forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Please remember, we're in the midst of our meditations on the Tarot Study Circle that is open to all Chamber of Reflection paid members. In September, we'll be meeting to discuss justice, and you should join us. And in the second half of our interview, again available to members at chamberofreflection.com and our Patreon, Angel Millar delves deeply into the circumstances which bind us and potential solutions. We also chat about the state of the world, society, and a future that most of us never imagined. Join us for that compelling conversation. And I'd like to remind you that although you're able to listen to this podcast at no charge, it costs time and money to create. We ask you to support our efforts in the creation of future podcasts by joining the membership section at chamberofreflection.com or subscribing via Patreon at patreon.com/occultapersonality. As always, if you're already supporting the show or have done so in the past, my heartfelt thanks, and I salute you.